The first time Jonah saw the hawk, it was dying. A broken thing in the dirt, one wing bent at an unnatural angle, its fierce yellow eyes dulled with pain. He'd been walking the fence line of his property, checking for breaks where the coyotes might slip through, when he spotted the fallen predator. Jonah crouched down, keeping his distance. The hawk's chest heaved with labored breaths. It tried to rise when it saw him, talons scraping uselessly against the hard-packed earth. A pathetic screech escaped its beak. "Easy now," Jonah said, his voice rough from disuse. The bird regarded him with suspicion, instinct telling it to flee, but its body refusing to comply. Jonah removed his worn canvas jacket and approached slowly. The hawk made one final attempt to escape before collapsing. With careful movements, Jonah wrapped the jacket around the injured bird, mindful of its talons and beak. The hawk weighed almost nothing in his arms, just feathers and hollow bones and fury. Jonah carried it back to his house, a weathered single-story structure that stood alone against the vast emptiness of the valley. Inside, the air hung still and stale. Dust motes danced in the shafts of late afternoon light that filtered through the windows. He cleared space on the kitchen table, pushing aside yesterday's coffee mug and the dog-eared paperback he'd been reading. The hawk lay motionless in his jacket, only its rapid breathing indicating life. Jonah filled a shallow bowl with water and set it nearby. "Don't know much about birds," he told the hawk as he examined the damaged wing. "But I know something about fixing broken things." Jonah had been the town's mechanic for 30 years before retiring. His hands, calloused and oil-stained, had coaxed life back into countless engines. Now they hovered uncertainly over the hawk's injured wing. He found a first aid kit in the bathroom and returned with gauze and tape. The hawk watched him with unblinking eyes as he fashioned a crude splint. When he finished, Jonah placed the bird in a cardboard box lined with an old towel. He set the box in the corner of his living room, away from drafts. "You'll either make it, or you won't," he told the hawk. "That's how it goes out here." That night, Jonah dreamed of flying. He soared over the valley, seeing his small house from above, a lonely outpost in a sea of scrubland and distant mountains. He woke before dawn, sheets damp with sweat, and immediately checked on the hawk. It was still alive, eyes open and alert. Jonah lived alone. Had been alone since Marie died 5 years back. Cancer took her quick, barely time to say goodbye. Their son Michael lived 3 states away, called on birthdays and Christmas, visited once a year with grandkids who viewed their grandfather as a curiosity, like some relic in a museum. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Jonah would wake, check on the hawk, offer it bits of raw meat he'd bought from the butcher in town. Sometimes the hawk ate, sometimes it didn't. He'd talk to it while he worked around the house, telling it about the weather, about the car he was restoring in the garage, about Marie. "She would have known what to do with you," he told the hawk one evening. Marie knew about wild things. Had a way with them. The hawk tilted its head, regarding him with those fierce yellow eyes. Jonah felt foolish, talking to a bird, but the silence in the house had grown too heavy over the years. After 2 weeks, the hawk began to stand. Its wing remained bound, but it would perch on the edge of the box, watching Jonah as he moved around the house. He fashioned a crude perch from an old broomstick mounted between 2 chairs. The hawk took to it immediately, balancing with its good wing partially extended. "You're getting stronger," Jonah observed. "Be flying again before long." The thought brought an unexpected pang. He'd grown accustomed to the hawk's presence, to having something alive sharing his space. When the time came to remove the splint, Jonah approached with mixed feelings. The hawk allowed him to handle its wing with minimal resistance. The bone had healed crooked, but the wing seemed functional. "Let's see what you can do," Jonah said, carrying the hawk outside. He set it on a fence post and stepped back. The hawk stretched both wings experimentally, the healed one extending slightly less than the other. It flapped once, twice, then launched itself into the air. The flight was awkward, unbalanced, but the hawk managed to glide to a nearby tree where it perched, looking back at Jonah. "Well, look at that," he said, smiling despite himself. "You're not quite right, but you'll manage." The hawk remained in the tree until sunset, then surprised Jonah by returning to the house. It perched on the porch railing, waiting. Jonah opened the door, and the hawk flew inside, settling on its perch as if it had never left. That night, Jonah dreamed of Marie. She stood in their garden, younger than when she died, her dark hair untouched by gray. She pointed to the sky where a hawk circled. "Some things find you for a reason, Jonah," she said. "Some things are meant to show you the way." He woke to find the hawk perched on the headboard of his bed, watching him. In the gray light of dawn, something glinted on his pillow. Jonah reached for it, fingers closing around cold metal. A sheriff's badge. Jonah sat up, heart hammering. The badge was old, tarnished, with a name he couldn't make out engraved beneath the star. The hawk made a soft sound, almost like a question. "Where did you get this?" Jonah asked, holding up the badge. The hawk merely watched him, offering no answers. Jonah turned the badge over in his hands. It felt heavy, significant. He remembered finding a badge like this years ago, shortly after moving to the valley. He'd been clearing rocks from what would become Marie's garden when he'd unearthed it, caked in dirt and forgotten. He'd kept it in a drawer, meaning to ask around town about it, but somehow never did. Now here it was again, or one very like it, delivered to his pillow by a hawk with a broken wing. That morning, Jonah drove into town for the first time in weeks. Millsville wasn't much, a main street with a handful of businesses, a gas station, a diner, a small grocery store. The sheriff's office sat at the end of the street, a modest building with a flagpole out front. Jonah parked his truck and sat for a moment, badge in hand. Sheriff Tom Gaines looked up when Jonah entered. He was a young man, not yet 40, with close-cropped hair and a perpetual expression of mild concern. "Mr. Mercer," he said, rising from his desk. "Don't often see you in town these days." "Found something," Jonah said, placing the badge on the desk. "Thought you might know something about it." Sheriff Gaines picked up the badge, examining it. His expression changed, something flickering behind his eyes. "Where'd you find this?" he asked, voice carefully neutral. Jonah hesitated. "In my yard," he said. "Digging in the garden." The lie came easily. Who would believe the truth? "This belonged to Sheriff Dawson," Gaines said. "Before my time. Disappeared about 20 years back. Some folks thought he just up and left. Others—" He trailed off, setting the badge down. "Others?" Jonah prompted. "Others thought there might be more to the story." Gaines shrugged. "Small town, big imaginations. Thanks for bringing this in, Mr. Mercer. I'll make sure it gets where it needs to go." Jonah nodded, but made no move to leave. "What happened to him?" "Sheriff Dawson? Like I said, before my time. Story goes he was investigating something out by the old mine. Never came back. Search parties found nothing." Gaines smiled tightly. "Probably just took off. This job doesn't pay much." Jonah left the sheriff's office with an uneasy feeling. Back home, the hawk was waiting on the porch railing. It followed him inside, watching as he poured himself a finger of whiskey and sat at the kitchen table. "What are you trying to tell me?" he asked the bird. That night, Jonah dreamed again. This time he stood at the edge of an open grave. The hawk circled overhead, crying out in warning. When he looked down into the grave, he saw a man in a sheriff's uniform, face obscured by shadow. A badge glinted on his chest. Jonah woke gasping. The hawk was perched on his bedpost, silhouetted against the moonlight streaming through the window. Its eyes caught the light, 2 points of fire in the darkness. The next morning, Jonah drove to the library. Mrs. Winters, the librarian, looked surprised to see him. "Jonah Mercer," she said. "It's been an age. What can I help you with today?" "Looking for old newspapers," he said. "From about 20 years back, when Sheriff Dawson disappeared." Mrs. Winters' smile faltered. "That's ancient history, Jonah. Why the interest?" "Just curious," he said. "Got time on my hands these days." She led him to a back room where bound volumes of the Millsville Gazette were stored. "These go back 50 years, she said. "You'll find what you're looking for in there." Jonah spent hours poring over yellowed newspapers. The story of Sheriff Dawson's disappearance spanned several issues. Initial reports described a routine investigation at the abandoned Blackridge mine after reports of trespassing. When Dawson failed to return, search parties were organized. After a week, the search was called off. Subsequent issues mentioned theories. He'd fallen down a shaft. He'd run off with money from the department. He'd started a new life somewhere else. One name appeared repeatedly in the articles: Deputy Frank Miller, who led the search efforts and later became sheriff himself. Miller had retired 5 years ago, replaced by Gaines. If anyone knew the truth about Dawson, it would be Miller. Frank Miller lived in a small house on the edge of town. Jonah had known him casually over the years. They'd nodded to each other at the diner, exchanged pleasantries at the gas station. Never friends, but friendly enough. Miller answered the door on the third knock. He'd aged since Jonah had last seen him, hair gone completely white, face deeply lined. Recognition dawned slowly in his roomy eyes. "Mercer," he said. "What brings you by?" "Sheriff Dawson," Jonah said simply. Miller's expression hardened. "That's a name I haven't heard in a while. What about him?" "I found his badge. On my property." A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Miller stepped back, opening the door wider. "You'd better come in." Miller's living room was cluttered with the accumulation of a long life. Photographs covered the walls, Miller in uniform, with family, with other officers. He gestured for Jonah to sit on a worn sofa while he lowered himself into a recliner with a grunt. "So you found Dawson's badge," Miller said. "Where exactly?" "Near the old Blackridge mine," Jonah lied, watching Miller's reaction. Miller's eyes narrowed. "That right? Interesting, since we searched that area pretty thoroughly back then. Maybe not thoroughly enough." Miller leaned forward. "What's this really about, Mercer? You never struck me as the type to dig up old stories." Jonah thought of the hawk, of the dreams, of Marie's voice telling him some things find you for a reason. "Just looking for the truth," he said. Miller studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "Truth is, Dawson was poking his nose where it didn't belong. The mine wasn't just abandoned, it was being used. Local boys running drugs, using the old tunnels for storage. Dawson found out, threatened to bring in the feds. And," Jonah prompted when Miller fell silent. "And nothing. He disappeared. End of story." "But you know more than that," Jonah pressed. "You were his deputy." Miller's gaze hardened. "Careful, Mercer. Some stories are better left untold." "I think I'm already part of this one," Jonah said. "My property backs up to the mine. If Dawson was killed there, I want to know." "Who said anything about killing?" Miller asked sharply. "No one comes back after 20 years of silence," Jonah said. "Not without a damn good reason." Miller stood abruptly. "I think you should go. I've said all I'm going to say." Outside, Jonah sat in his truck, hands gripping the steering wheel. The conversation with Miller had confirmed his suspicions. There was more to Dawson's disappearance than a man simply walking away from his life. And somehow, Jonah's property, his home, was connected to it. The hawk was waiting when he returned home, perched on the porch railing. It watched as Jonah approached, head tilted in that curious way. Jonah reached out slowly, and to his surprise, the hawk stepped onto his outstretched arm. Its talons gripped firmly but didn't break the skin. "What are we doing here?" Jonah asked softly. The hawk's gaze was steady, unblinking. Then it launched itself from his arm, flying toward the back of the property, toward the border where Jonah's land met the old mine. It circled once, twice, crying out before landing on a gnarled juniper tree. Jonah followed. The hawk led into the far corner of his property, where a small stream cut through the land. It perched on a boulder beside the water, watching as Jonah approached. The ground here was different, disturbed, uneven. Jonah had always assumed it was natural erosion from the stream, but now, looking with new eyes, he saw it differently. Someone had dug here, long ago. The soil had settled unevenly over time. Jonah returned to the house for a shovel. The hawk remained on its boulder, sentinel-like, as Jonah began to dig. The soil was hard, compacted by years of rain and sun. Sweat soaked through his shirt as he worked, the physical labor a relief after days of uncertainty. The shovel struck something solid 3 feet down. Jonah dropped to his knees, clearing dirt away with his hands. Fabric emerged, faded blue, once a uniform. Then bones, yellowed with age. And finally, a face, or what remained of one. A skull, grinning up at the sky it hadn't seen in 20 years. Jonah sat back on his heels, breath coming in short gasps. The hawk landed beside the grave, regarding the remains with what almost seemed like respect. "Sheriff Dawson," Jonah said quietly. He should call the current sheriff. This was evidence of a murder, buried on his land. But something held him back. If Dawson had been killed for discovering a drug operation, and if Miller had been involved, as his evasiveness suggested, then Gaines might be part of it too. The badge had been a warning, a message from beyond the grave delivered by a hawk with a broken wing. Jonah carefully reburied the remains, marking the spot with a pile of stones. He would need proof, evidence beyond a badge and bones, before he went to the authorities. And he would need to be careful. If Miller suspected Jonah knew the truth, he might be in danger. Back at the house, Jonah washed the dirt from his hands, the cold water turning brown as it swirled down the drain. The hawk perched on the back of a kitchen chair, watching him. "We're in this together now," Jonah told it. "Whatever this is." That night, Jonah dreamed of Marie again. She stood by the stream where he'd found Dawson's remains. "You always said you wanted to make a difference," she told him. "It's not too late." Jonah woke with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. The hawk was gone from its usual perch, the window open to the pre-dawn air. He dressed quickly and went outside. The hawk circled high above the house, its silhouette dark against the lightning sky. It called once, twice, then flew toward town. Jonah followed in his truck. The streets of Millsville were empty at this early hour, businesses still closed, sidewalks deserted. The hawk led him to the sheriff's office, where it perched on the flagpole outside. Inside his truck, Jonah considered his options. He had no real evidence beyond a badge and a grave on his property. Going to Gaines might be walking into a trap if the current sheriff was connected to Dawson's murder. But doing nothing meant letting killers go free, letting Dawson remain forgotten in an unmarked grave. The decision was made for him when another vehicle pulled up, Frank Miller's old pickup truck. The former sheriff emerged, glancing around furtively before using a key to enter the sheriff's office. The hawk screeched from its perch, the sound cutting through the morning quiet. Jonah waited, watching. 10 minutes later, Miller emerged carrying a file box. He loaded it into his truck and drove away. The hawk launched itself from the flagpole, following Miller's truck. Jonah started his engine and followed too, keeping a safe distance. Miller drove to the abandoned mine. The entrance was boarded up, warning signs posted around the perimeter. He parked near a side entrance partially hidden by overgrown brush. The hawk landed on a dead tree nearby, watching as Miller carried the file box inside. Jonah parked out of sight and approached on foot. The hawk's cry alerted him to movement, another vehicle approaching. Sheriff Gaines' patrol car pulled up beside Miller's truck. Gaines got out, looked around, then entered the mine. Moving carefully, Jonah made his way to the entrance. Voices echoed from within, Miller and Gaines arguing. "We need to move everything," Miller was saying. "Mercer knows something. He came asking about Dawson yesterday." "Calm down," Gaines replied. "Even if he found something, it's just his word. No one's going to dig up a 20-year-old case based on some retiree's hunches. He said he found the badge. On his property." A pause. "That's impossible. We buried it with Dawson." "Well, he has it. Or had it. He brought it to you, didn't he?" Another pause. "Yes. Said he found it in his garden." "And you believed him?" "Wake up, Tom. Something's happening here. First those federal agents sniffing around last month, now this. We need to clean house." Jonah backed away, heart pounding. He had heard enough to confirm his suspicions. Miller and Gaines were both involved, both covering up Dawson's murder. He needed to get this information to someone who could act on it, the state police, the FBI. A twig snapped beneath his foot. The voices inside the mine fell silent. "Someone's out there," Gaines said. Jonah turned to run, but it was too late. Gaines emerged from the mine, hand on his holstered gun. "Mr. Mercer," he called. "What a surprise. Taking a morning walk?" Jonah froze. "Just out for some air," he said, forcing a casual tone. "Didn't expect to see anyone out here." Miller appeared behind Gaines, face darkening when he saw Jonah. "He heard us," he said flatly. "Look at his face." Gaines drew his weapon. "Mr. Mercer, I'm going to need you to come with us. We have some things to discuss." The hawk screamed from above, diving suddenly toward Gaines. Its talons raked across the sheriff's face, drawing blood. Gaines cried out, firing his weapon reflexively into the air. The hawk wheeled away, unharmed. In the moment of confusion, Jonah ran. He heard shouts behind him, then a gunshot. Pain exploded in his shoulder, spinning him around. He fell, clutching at the wound. Blood seeped between his fingers. Gaines approached, gun leveled at Jonah's chest. "You should have minded your own business, old man." The hawk attacked again, this time going for Miller, who had moved to Gaines' side. Miller swatted at it, cursing. The distraction gave Jonah enough time to pull himself to his feet. He stumbled toward the trees, each step sending fresh waves of pain through his shoulder. Another shot rang out. Jonah waited for the impact, but it never came. Instead, he heard a grunt of pain behind him. Turning, he saw Miller on the ground, blood pooling beneath him. Gaines stood over him, gun still raised. "Frank was getting sloppy," Gaines said, turning his attention back to Jonah. "Too much of a liability. You understand, don't you? It's just business." The hawk circled overhead, screaming. Jonah's vision began to blur at the edges. Blood loss, shock, he was running out of time. "Dawson was a good man," Jonah said, his voice surprisingly steady. "He deserved better than a shallow grave on my land." "He was a fool," Gaines replied. "Just like you." The hawk dove one final time, talons extended. This time it went for Gaines' gun hand. The sheriff fired wildly, missing both Jonah and the hawk. The bird's attack knocked the weapon from Gaines' grasp, sending it skittering across the ground. Jonah lunged for it, ignoring the white-hot pain in his shoulder. His fingers closed around the grip. He turned, pointing the gun at Gaines. "On your knees," Jonah ordered. "Hands where I can see them." Gaines complied, hatred burning in his eyes. "You won't get away with this, Mercer. You're nobody. A washed-up mechanic with a bird." "Maybe," Jonah agreed. "But I found Dawson, and I heard you confess. That's enough." The hawk landed on a boulder nearby, watching the scene with those fierce yellow eyes. Jonah kept the gun trained on Gaines while he used his free hand to retrieve the sheriff's radio. He called for help, reporting an officer down and a suspect in custody. When state troopers arrived 20 minutes later, they found Jonah sitting on a rock, still holding Gaines at gunpoint. Miller lay dead nearby. Jonah's shoulder had been hastily bandaged with his own shirt. The hawk was nowhere to be seen. The investigation that followed uncovered decades of corruption. The abandoned mine had indeed been used for drug trafficking, with both Miller and Gaines on the payroll. Dawson had discovered the operation and paid with his life. His remains were recovered from Jonah's property and given a proper burial with full honors. Jonah gave his statement, told them everything, except for the part about the hawk delivering the badge to his pillow. Some things were too strange, too personal to share. 3 months later, Jonah sat on his porch, arm still in a sling, but healing well. The evening was warm, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple as the sun set behind the mountains. He sipped his coffee, watching the horizon. A familiar cry drew his attention upward. The hawk circled once, twice, then landed on the porch railing. Its wing had healed completely, though it still flew with a slight tilt, a permanent reminder of its injury. "Didn't think I'd see you again," Jonah said. The hawk regarded him with those unblinking eyes. Then, with a cry that seemed almost like farewell, it launched itself into the air. Jonah watched as it soared higher and higher, until it was just a speck against the darkening sky. Inside the house, on the mantel above the fireplace, sat a framed sheriff's badge, a gift from the state police in recognition of Jonah's bravery. Beside it stood a photograph of Marie, smiling from a garden long since gone to seed. Jonah looked at them both for a long moment, then turned away. Outside, night was falling. He had seeds to plant, a garden to rebuild. Tomorrow would be a new day.